The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to this State of Flux webinar entitled SRM, a Driver for Risk Reduction. Is Mel Schutz. I'm head of SRM for State of Flux, and what I'd like to do is spend the next 30 minutes or so talking to you about the way in which we believe SRM, or supplier relationship management, can be in supply chain risk. Currently muted, and they will remain that way for the duration of the webinar. This is to cut down on potential background noise from having multiple attendees. So please bear with us. The opportunity to ask questions is certainly there. There's a facility within the control panel on this webinar, and we'll pick up those questions hopefully in about 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the webinar. So please, as we go through the next 30 minutes, feel free to post those questions. We'll pick up and respond to as many of those as we can at the end. So to start, let's take a quick look back at the last 5 years, and I think most people agree it's been 5 years of some pretty extraordinary events around the world. Some more high profile than others, but many events that have impacted potentially very negatively on supply chains. Those events span a whole spectrum of environmental, political, social and economic activities and events that have had an impact on global supply chains. I don't think the last 5 years is that different. I'm sure there's plenty of records available to indicate that this number of events and this variety of events is fairly typical for a 5-year period. But certainly I think there are a number here that will really resonate with people on the call and bring back some pretty stark memories of situations that have arisen. But risk is everywhere. I think if we put most people in a room for half an hour, they would identify most of the risk areas that are mentioned on this slide. Some perhaps are more obvious than others. I think we're all conscious of the risk around the weather, particularly in the UK at the moment. Also industrial action, which hasn't been a feature of supply chain disruption much in the last few years, but there are 1 or 2 incidents that have occurred recently which I think make us aware that risk certainly hasn't gone away. Risks around changes in the geopolitical landscape. I'm sure most people will cast their mind back 2 or 3 years to the events in North Africa, which changed the whole nature of the political environment in North Africa over the course of just a few months. So I think we're clear that those risks are out there, and most people will be aware of them in one form or another. Increasingly, those risks are impacting on supply chains, not just on global supply chains, but certainly that's a factor that has increased the risk. Clearly, extending and stretching supply chains and making them more complex is a contributory factor towards the level of increased risk. That's not just our opinion. In August of 2008, Intelligence Unit issued a survey, or ran a survey, which asked organisations where they saw, or what they saw the likelihood being of supplier-related threats. And what we've got is some feedback that suggests that there's a pretty wide range of supplier-related registering, and we're actually recording or giving feedback that they somewhat or very likely to occur. So the risk that was thought most likely to occur, I guess as most people would probably agree, is around supplier quality or failure against volume commitments. Supply chain reductions due to production issues, adverse changes in the supplier's senior management team. So they were considered the supplier-related threats that were the most likely to occur. However, there are others that represent perhaps a more broader set of risks from the environment within which suppliers operate, from the environment from which within which supply chains operate. So there were certainly risks being understood around environmental or human rights issues, and also risks around fraudulent or criminal activity. So it's pretty clear that there's an understanding of a fairly broad range of risk, and there's at least an assessment, albeit quite rudimentary, as to how great the threat from that risk actually is. Whilst risk doesn't only apply to global supply chains, it certainly is the scenario which suggests that the risk levels will be higher. So it's worth just maybe having a look at the kind of environment within which global supply chains have increased over the last few years. They're certainly a product of the information and technology age. I think whilst global supply chains have existed for many years, the proliferation in recent years has largely been enabled clearly by the internet and by the ability to communicate very rapidly, very instantly, and to track supply chains through various territories and parts of the world. Certainly, global supply chains did exist before the internet, but as you can imagine, they were nowhere near as attractive when communication was via telex or via fax or telephone. Like anything, I think, that's driven by fierce competitive pressure and cost issues, the balance between risk and opportunity is something that we need to consider. So what has driven global supply chains is that need to be more competitive, is that need to respond to cost pressure. And that may have led in some cases to the risks associated with those supply chains not being fully understood or appreciated. What has also enabled global supply chain is the very industrialization of the emerging economies, where many of those supply chains now emanate from. And we're also, I guess, all too acutely aware that the industrialization of those economies has not always gone hand in hand with the required infrastructure, the required respect for human rights and for health and safety, etc. So that in itself has represented another aspect of risk in terms of supply chains. And finally, what happened at the same time that supply chains were going global was that strategic procurement, or the importance of strategic procurement and supply chain, was finally landing and being recognized at the top table in organizations. I think the impact that the cost of services and products had on the bottom line performance of an organization has finally I think become something that organizations have woken up to, and in waking up to that fact, they then set more challenging tasks and objectives around supply chain, driving that need to find alternative sources of supply and potentially extending supply chains. So out of that period came essentially three main sourcing strategies. There was the strategy to identify and source in low-cost manufacturing areas of the world. Clearly, going back 10 or 15 years, China was very much seen as the emerging force in terms of providing low-cost manufacturing. Probably a little later, but alongside low-cost manufacturing came a sense of confidence, really, in starting to globally source more products, more services that were considered perhaps more important or more key to the organization. The source in the Far East and in other territories increased on the back of low-cost manufacturing, really moving up the technology spectrum towards more high-tech products. And of course, over that period, there was also the really significant thrust around outsourcing of services, and particularly offshore provision of services such as call centers, such as back office operations, etc. So I think out of that situation arose those three sourcing strategies, and they in themselves would have resulted in an increased level of risk. Clearly, the low-cost manufacturing areas that were being explored were geographically more further away from the customer base, and therefore created a longer, more exposed supply chain. Along with low-cost manufacturing came a whole raft of other risks. We've already alluded to human rights, health and safety, but certainly quality and continuity of supply would also have been concerns. Global sourcing, again, bringing similar kinds of risks, but ones that are more associated towards that higher specification or higher tech product or service. And clearly, the risk associated with outsourcing of services was something that I think is fairly widely acknowledged as having been underestimated at the time, particularly those services that had experience. And of course, we know substantially issues in terms of outsourcing that has subsequently been reversed. So we had those three sourcing strategies, but when we overlay another strategy on top of these, which was emerging and happening at around the same time, we get an escalation of risk, and that is where lean supply chain practices were also being implemented at the same time. So if you can imagine the situation where we're extending supply chains more globally, we're making the logistics more. We're working across numerous time zones, etc. If you then overlay a lean supply chain strategy, which is taking inventory out of the supply chain, is moving more towards just-in-time and flexible manufacturing, I think we can see that those two strategies, whilst in their own right, very sound, in most cases the right thing to do, the risk starts to escalate fairly rapidly when those two strategies are overlaid one over the other. However, supply chain risk isn't all about disasters. The very high-profile incidents that we perhaps can think of from the last few years, they certainly grab the headlines. But risk is something that can develop over time. It can increase and change almost. And really, this is the first, probably the first time that supply relationship management starts to play a significant role in understanding how those risks are changing by setting up a better dialogue with supply-side organisations, understanding supply chains and the various risk drivers, and working collaboratively with suppliers to understand those risk drivers and to monitor the individually small significantly change a risk profile. Essentially, those risk drivers fall into two areas. There's the wider, more environmental risks around business and the wider external environment. So what we can see is that things like political, social, and geographic changes change the risk profile. They can do it in a fairly rapid way. Obviously, a revolution or the really fast-moving events in North Africa a few years ago, or indeed the fall of the Berlin Wall many further back, they can be seen as fairly kind of seismic changes in the political landscape. But other changes happen over time. The issues in the Eurozone, for instance, have taken place over a period of time. The social changes in parts of Eastern Europe have taken place, and therefore they represent either risk or opportunity. But those kind of changes need to be monitored. We're aware that ethical standards are changing. So sometimes they change quite rapidly. Again, perhaps when they're brought into stark focus by some tragic events such as the garment factory collapse in Bangladesh or other incidents. But generally, ethical standards are changing, and the way forward is that countries currently who perhaps don't have a reputation for human rights or for good protection of workers' conditions will increasingly find that they have to move in line with more globally recognized standards. Regulations change over time. We tend to get a drip feed of guidelines, of recommendations, etc., which ultimately find their way into regulation. Manufacturing processes are changing over time. Introduction of Lean, Six Sigma, JIT, for instance, all happening over a period of time, all of which increase the level of risk and pressure on the supply chain. Innovation and development and changes in market sectors are also things that can happen fairly rapidly or can happen over a period of time. So what we're looking at is how developing a good relationship with key suppliers will help keep those risk drivers under a constant review and enable us to respond to those changes as and when it's necessary. Other changes which are more specific to supply chain, increasing requirement to have timely deliveries, to be responsive, incremental changes in quality standards, the potential for a cost base to change. Clearly, quite recently, it's evident that the low cost base in China is probably something of the past, and alternative territories are emerging as having lower costs of manufacture than perhaps China has now. Reliability and continuity of supply can be something that can change almost imperceptibly over time, and we need to be aware of those changes to actually act and take and intervene before those changes become a major issue. Product and service complexity, again, always changing, invariably becoming more complex and therefore representing more risk. So in summary, risk isn't static, so therefore risk management can't afford to be static either. The risk drivers, some of those that we've suggested there, need to form part of a set of metrics which are more widely used, which are called key risk indicators, which are essentially leading indicators, the type of things that we should be measuring to predict that risk may be on the increase, and at some point in the future, unless there's some kind of intervention, that level of risk may get to a point where it becomes likely to occur and needs positive mitigation. Okay, so what can we do as a supply chain management community? What can we do? I think for too long, many have been prepared to do nothing or to do very little. There's a sense that let's hope things don't happen. I think we've already indicated that most people would be aware of the nature of risk. Some of those risks are taken into account and be something that's more or less left to chance. So I think most people would agree that would be. The alternative to that is one which is probably a little longer term, but could also do with some immediate action, and that's to reassess the sourcing strategies that left us with organisations that are really to long and complex supply chains. So I think we can do a better job of risk management during the category planning and sourcing process, and over a period of time that actually might lead to us bringing some of those supply chains closer to home. As I said, there's already examples where low-cost manufacturing is actually coming out of China and perhaps into certain parts of Eastern Europe, along also with some of the higher tech sourcing solutions. But if we look at what is a fairly generic seven-step category management process, what many of these processes don't include or don't really enforce are the risk management activities which need to take place at each of those steps, right from the very early assessment of category plans in terms of risk, through to researching the risk, categorizing it, evaluation, deciding risk treatments, signing off the risk at each step as we move through to make sure that we can move to the next step of this sourcing strategy with a level of risk which the business considers is acceptable and is within their risk appetite. So I think that there's quite possibly another webinar in what we need to do around embedding risk more effectively in the sourcing process. However, what I think as a supply chain management community, what we need to do is get better at risk management. We need to combine people, process, and technology effectively to manage risk. What we'll focus on in the next few minutes is the people element, which is how people manage relationships and the way in which those people can impact effective risk management. But just before we move on, let's make sure we understand the process is important. It can give us really robust ways of identifying and evaluating risk. It should give us the required governance and sign-off to make sure that the risk that we are living with as an organisation is understood and is properly approved. And also it can clarify and make clear the roles and responsibilities in managing risk. Technology is a key enabler. It can help us with risk reporting. Managing risk is a lot about having information and being able to share information effectively, and certainly technology has a major part to play in that, along with its ability to make risk management more efficient and to improve productivity. But if we focus on people, it's people that will be proactive or not proactive in managing risk. So people will make decisions about how they prioritize risk management and how proactive they are, not only in just monitoring risk, but actively trying to reduce it. It's people that can apply the creativity and the innovative thinking about ways of avoiding and reducing risk. It's people that will work collaboratively together in order to find ways in which risk can be reduced, and they'll carry out the intelligent analysis of risk and ultimately will make decisions about what needs to be done about risk and what risk is acceptable and what isn't. So if rather than think about people, let's think about SRM, and really the focus here is very much on the R in SRM. It's the relationship part where we can develop and improve that relationship with supplier organisations in order to do many good things, one of which is improve risk management. So let's firstly take a look at what is SRM, and it means different things to different organisations. We tend to adopt an approach which tries to focus the definition of SRM on working collaboratively with suppliers that are vital to the success of the organisation. Now, they will be suppliers that will contribute very positively to the organisation in many ways, but almost inevitably those organisations and those suppliers will represent a level of risk. So SRM is about building trust and maximising mutual value from the relationships, and part of that mutual value will be reduction in risk. So if it relates to risk, the definition wouldn't be that different. It would be working collaboratively with the suppliers that represent the most risk. That's not to say they're bad suppliers or they're inefficient or ineffective suppliers. That's simply a product of the fact that they are supplying products or services within represents more risk to the organisation. Or they might be suppliers which are based in parts of the world which inherently represent more supply chain risk. So it's about working with those suppliers, and it's about building trust and managing risk more collaboratively. So I think this concept of collaborative risk management is very much in step with the overall aims and objectives of SRM. SRM, as we again, those of you that are familiar with the way in which we positioned SRM in our research, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is part of a wider, more holistic approach to supplier management. So, and as you can see, what underpins that approach is effective risk management throughout the procurement life cycle. Build on top of that effective contract management, performance management and SRM. And what we'll get is a very, I think, a very effective outcome in terms of SRM programs. Clearly, there isn't the resource, the time, or the ability to manage risk in the same way with every supplier, in the same way that we don't manage every relationship the same. So it is inevitable that through a process of segmentation, which is partially based on risk, the risk management activities for certain suppliers will differ from perhaps the more basic risk management that's applied elsewhere. Again, if you're familiar with state of flux research and our work in this area, you might recognise this model of SRM, which is 6 pillars. We did consider when we developed this model whether or not risk management was in fact a pillar in its own right. But I think the conclusion we reached was that effective risk management, in the same way that SRM has these 6 elements, then risk management also has 6 elements. So it actually spans the breadth of these 6 pillars and isn't a silo in its own right. In terms of business drivers of value, clearly it is a key business driver. The evidence that we've collected suggests that it's now considered the most important business driver for SRM, and it certainly delivers tangible benefit to an organisation. It is a subject that's desperately important to stakeholders, so therefore needs to form part of that stakeholder engagement. Good risk management does need to be demonstrated as part of good governance, and that in particular in regulated industries, but also in non-regulated industries. As we've already alluded to, people and skills, people are absolutely key to making a difference to risk management. There are elements of it which are process-based, which can be technology-based, but at the end of the day, risk is largely about the intelligent analysis that people apply to risk, and ultimately the kind of decisions they make on what action to take. Information technology systems are a vital tool, and openness in relationships. So the relationship needs to develop to a point where that can exist. So as I mentioned, I've just pulled out a couple of highlights from our research report this year. And when we think about segmentation, suppliers are inevitably segmented into various tiers. The segmentation criteria that organisations use is largely based on the level of spend and on the level of risk, or as it states here, the criticality of products and services. So that has been the case since segmentation was first developed a number of years ago, and it remains the overwhelmingly the most important criteria. Other aspects of the supplier relationship are increasingly being considered, but nonetheless, spend and risk remain the most important criteria. As I mentioned, risk or risk reduction as a business driver for investing in SRM this year was considered to be the most important. For the first time, 90% of our respondents believed it to be either important or very important as a risk driver. I beg your pardon, as a business driver. Clearly, you can see that there are many other drivers. There's a whole raft of reasons why organisations want to invest more in SRM. But for the first time this year, risk has just edged ahead in terms of being the most important. It does deliver tangible benefit. It's in fact, risk reduction is the second most frequently reported SRM benefit behind cost reduction. And as you can see from this chart, we've plotted the percentage or the proportion of respondents claiming that risk is a real benefit. That's increased year on year certainly since 2011, and also before that. But we can see that certainly the output from SRM, the benefit of risk reduction, is something that's clearly recognised by organisations. So, to make risk reduction an important part of our SRM programs, there are numerous things we can do. What I've just tried to do is to pull out a number of practical steps that can be taken to embed risk management more effectively in SRM programs. Firstly, we need to ensure that SRM is considered as value and is recognised as a valuable output from SRM, and it forms part of the value proposition. I think in some organisations the level of risk can actually be equated to a financial figure, and that makes it even more powerful. But nonetheless, every organisation is increasingly concerned about risk, and depending on who in the organisation we're speaking to, we need to make sure that the ability of SRM to have a positive impact on risk is properly understood. And that means articulating risk as part of that stakeholder engagement, particularly with senior management, some of whom could be held personally accountable for situations where a risk that they were responsible for managing actually became a real issue and a real incident. And it's obviously, as we're probably aware, it's not unheard of that senior management can be held personally accountable for that. We need to ensure that the risk data that's gathered during sourcing is transitioned into supplier management. We showed an image of the sourcing cycle, or the category management cycle earlier, and not every organisation perhaps applies every risk management tool that they should, but nonetheless there is usually quite a good amount of risk data that's gathered during sourcing. So let's all we pick up on that. Let's make sure that we actually we determine whether it's thorough and whether it's robust. When a contract transitions into an operational environment and into a supplier management environment, that risk assessment may have been 4 or 5 months old. So it's really important that that's revisited and it's understood being something that needs to be maintained. We check in that the absolute basics are there. Business continuity plans, have they been specified? Have they been put in place? Have they been tested? Plans, are they in place? Clearly, a lot of risk will exist around a relationship or a contract that needs to be exited. So it's really important those basics are in place. We do quite a lot of, as an organisation, we do quite a lot of contract management and contract management reviews, and one of the kind of most frequent occurrences or incidents that we come across is where contracts, either the business continuity plans haven't been put in place, or that there are exit plans, or the exit plans in contracts just haven't been properly defined. My advice is let's maybe change the language a little. Let's not talk about risk reviews, which tend to suggest that we run down a checklist and we do a very quick, has anything changed? No, okay, let's move on. From my personal perspective, that's a little too passive. We really do need to dig deeper. We need to ask the difficult questions. We need to engage suppliers more effectively and understand their supply chain and ensure that their own risk management processes are in place, and that collectively everybody in the supply chain is managing risk in the right way. The collaborative people element comes in with working specifically with key account managers. The role of key account managers is changing, and we need to encourage that change to become more proactive and more account management than sales management. So this means that actually working with account managers to understand the whole risk landscape and to work collaboratively to reduce or mitigate that risk. We need to understand the risk appetite of both organisations and make sure that the residual risk that sits within both organisations is within that appetite and is properly understood and properly signed off. And finally, I think we certainly need to use more metrics around risk. This concept of key risk indicators isn't one that's really that well embedded. KRIs clearly have to be leading indicators. They can draw on historical data, but they need to be looking forward. The most obvious example of a KRI is probably the supplier financial information that many organisations really look at the and we have the skills and the capability to actually pick up whether or not that that financial data is indicating a risk that might be 3, 6, or 12 months away. So we've spoken about trying to understand risk, to analyse and evaluate it, to mitigate it, and also to reduce it. But I think in trying to reduce risk, it's really important to understand what we mean by that. And certainly we would suggest that risk reduction is not what's known in the bookmaking world as laying off. It doesn't mean just passing the risk on to somebody else. That risk is still real. The reality is that that risk may now well be in a place where it's leftable, in a place where it's less likely to be well managed. But what will happen if that risk actually occurs is that the damage will come storming back up the supply chain. It may wipe out the second-tier supplier. It will certainly do a lot of damage to the first-tier supplier and potentially damage the customer as well. In some cases, the damage to the customer can be even greater. These may be old adages, they may be slightly cliched, but I think they are worth revisiting. We can outsource products or services, but we can't outsource risk. We can push risk down the supply chain, but it doesn't make it any less likely to happen unless we mitigate that risk and manage it effectively. And certainly we can cover off ourselves in contracts, but anything that we recover via a contract is unlikely to be more than a fraction of the actual losses incurred. So just to wrap up, the essence of collaborative risk management, I think it needs to start with a fair apportionment of risk in the contract. We need to work in more collaboratively and get this visibility of all risk through joint risk assessment and supply chain transparency. Create joint risk records and monitor them as a group. So that could be customer, supplier, and even suppliers at the near down. We need to evaluate and re-evaluate risk on a regular basis and really work collaboratively to mitigate risk more effectively. Okay, so that concludes the webinar. Thank you for your attention. I've seen the message board registering a few questions as we've gone through, and we've around 5 minutes to pick up a few questions. Apologies if I don't get to them all, but we will, as a commitment, make sure that you receive a copy, a recording of this webinar, and also a written answer to any questions that we haven't been able to cover in this session. So just give me a second, I'll just run down the list of questions and pick out some that hopefully will be particularly relevant to the people on the line. The first question is, are any organisations that you are with, are we aware of any organisations using big data, including things like social media, to help monitor potential risks? That is a really good question, and it's particularly relevant, obviously, to the world we live in now, with multiple sources of information, including social media. Certainly, there are software solutions. There are organisations that are able to be able to monitor multiple communication channels in order to pick up potential risks. My experience, or our experience of that, is with a piece of technology that we've developed, which is our supplier management platform, which is essentially a system for managing supplier relationships. Within that, we've embedded a news feed based on keywords. So an individual supplier manager can set up a number of keywords in order to get news feeds that relate to that subject. So it could be the subject of it generally, or it could be a particular supplier. It doesn't monitor Twitter, which is again something that perhaps we need to look at, but it certainly monitors major news feeds. So it is possible, and it is happening, and it's something we need to be aware of. I think most people probably will be aware that that all the changes in North Africa a couple of years ago they were the indications of that level of change was probably on Twitter long before it was in the conventional media. Second question is, can risk management be a blocker to innovation? I guess that also kind of, I guess rather than risk management, it probably is appetite really. I think there is the potential that organisations that have a particularly low appetite for risk will be perhaps considered less innovative and less likely to take a chance, shall we say. That's not to say that innovation should be thought of or risk should be ignored when we're talking about innovation. I think it's perfectly possible to build an innovation process, which is something that many organisations are looking to do to take better advantage of supplier innovation. But in building that process, it's really important that risk has its proper place, so that when ideas are going through the process of evaluation, the risk associated with that innovation is also fully understood and is part of that decision-making process. Actually, there's a question about why is spend among the most important criteria to select critical suppliers. I think I'm not sure that's obviously that. What I indicated was that both spend and risk are still by far the most important criteria in identifying significant or critical suppliers. I think it's just the fact that with a high level of spend comes a certain amount of risk. Just the very fact that with a single organisation, you can be spending multi-million figure sums every year represents a level of risk. I think it would be unlikely that if a supplier, a product or service was considered very low risk, but the spend was high, that in itself that would make them a critical supplier. In fact, we've worked with organisations where we've actually counselled against that, because essentially if the transactional process is robust and if the market is being properly monitored and the contract is being properly managed, then I guess the more transactional management of that relationship is probably appropriate. But when that high level of spend is combined with a high level of risk, which is often the case, then there becomes the need to focus on suppliers more critically. I think what time for one more question. Isn't risk wider than SRM? SRM programs within organisations typically cover 10 or 20 suppliers. Should risk management cover more? Yes, absolutely. I would agree. I think, as we explained at the start, what we've done is by aligning risk management and SRM, we're recognising the fact that a more sophisticated and a more thorough approach to risk management is probably necessary for suppliers that are critical, because in many cases they've been designated as critical because of the risk, if you follow that logic. But certainly a basic level of risk management needs to be undertaken with almost all supplier relationships and all supplier contracts. That risk management should be embedded within the sourcing process, it should be embedded within the contract and performance management process. And in the case of the more critical suppliers, then we move on to another level of risk management. Okay, that's according to my clock, that's brought us around to 45 minutes. So I need to close the webinar at this stage. That leaves me to thank you for your attendance. Thank you for some interesting questions. Anybody, excuse me if I didn't get to your question, I apologise. But in our follow-up, we'll certainly give you feedback and an answer, at least initial answer on any of those questions. And I'm sure if there's further discussion, then we can arrange that on a one-to-one basis. So again, thank you for your attention, and I'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you.